All right, you know the drill.
Pull out your phones, please.
And it is the same link. If you didn't X out of it before, you just refresh it.
Okay, thank you. How often do you all reach out to content creators you follow on social media?
It's fun hearing how many folks are talking about cultural specificity, because in our workshops, that's often a stat that comes up, is that so often a lot of people of color are represented as Hispanic or Asian, and that's it. It was a shocking stat in our Latin and Hispanic representation workshop, but I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was over 50%.
Yeah.
Was just a character that was of Latin or Hispanic origin with zero cultural specificity.
And our lovely friends at the Norman Lear Center also did a study for Asian American representation that found very similar things, and also with Native American representation, where they also found that a lot of the times when there is a tribe identified, it's a fake fictional tribe as compared to real tribal affiliations for characters. But we're talking about social media.
But we're back to social media.
Anyway, It looks like most people have never reached out to content creators, which I will say probably means that you're not Gen Z. Because as we'll see it on the following slide, LGBTQ youth report strong parasocial relationships with content creators, which means that they not only reach out to content creators, but content creators reach back out to them. But we're not going to try to explain the research, because our next panel is coming from the source, and they'll tell you a lot more about it in a lot more concise ways.
All right, so I'm just going to introduce our moderator for the next panel, which is Dr. Mike Parent, who is the principal researcher at Hope Lab, where his work focuses on building research and innovation partnerships to help improve the health and well-being of young people, especially LGBTQ young people.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to introduce myself, but that was great. I'm Mike Parent, principal researcher at Hope Lab. If we can say who we are for the audience.
I'm Jeffrey. I'm famous on TikTok. Should I say more? That's it.
Isaiah Choquette, pronouns are they, them. If that gets hard to remember, just they, the they. I am a youth advocate who does a lot of work with youth developmental services here in LA County and across the state. I'm also very nervous about this chair. I've seen Shallow Hal, so I got nerves. So I'm just like, can she hold me?
Very demure, very mindful.
But yes.
My name is Brad Bond. I'm a professor at the University of San Diego, and I've worked with Mike and Hope Lab on some of this research. I am not TikTok famous.
So thank you all for being here. As one step to kind of ground us in this discussion about parasocial relationships and representation online, if we could each share an experience we had early on of seeing at least one of our identities reflected in media, that would be great. I can start with mine. I'm Canadian, and after hockey, Kids in the Hall would come on. Anyone remember Kids in the Okay, a couple people, none of the Gen Zers. But Scott Thompson was on that show, and I was very young. I didn't really understand what was happening there, but I knew it was something that was similar to me somehow. Jeffrey?
David Bowie was on TV. It was an interview, and the interviewer was giving David a hard time about his shoes. Maybe some people have seen the clip. It's gone viral a couple times. But the interviewer says, "Why are you wearing women's shoes?" And David says, "They're not women's shoes, they're my shoes." And I was like 6 years old, and I was like, my real dad. I was born on Mars, yes.
I would say, just because of my blended identity, I have a few. The first one that comes to mind is Glee. It was a show that really, and it's funny that was called out earlier. That was a show that actually had an impact in my life. Through that show, my mom actually was able to open up and see the harm that was happening because of her inability to respect my identities. And it really put a lens into focus for her, where she had to realize like she was choosing a belief over a physical being that she brought into this world in front of her. And was she gonna love that, or this thing that she just had to hope was there at the end of the line for her? And she did, and she is now, I'm proud to say, one of those moms who's on Trans Awareness Day. She's out there, I'm your mom if you don't have a mom. She does the free mom hugs at every Pride in Nebraska. Oh yeah, I'm also from Nebraska, so. But yeah, that show really had a big impact on me. And I would later come to find out that the non-binary character in the show also kind of inspired me as a person of color who's navigating that. So yeah, and I would say insecure. I love someone called that in earlier. One of the only representations I feel that really captures Blackness in an untraumatic and problematic way, where it shows our life outside of that. It shows that we are people that experience joy, love, and happiness just like everyone else.
When I was in high school, I went to this coffee shop in St. Louis where I grew up that was known for where all the misfits hung out if you weren't 21 and couldn't go to the bar. And I remember one day, somebody who I had met there and chatted with for quite a while slipped me a VHS tape and said, "Go, you gotta watch this." And it was the movie Trick, which was a narrative about two young queer people looking for a place to hook up. And I remember watching that movie and thinking, I don't understand, there are other people out there that feel like this, and that movie was pretty inspiring.
Thank you, YouTube. That's how I saw that movie.
Thank you. Dr. Bond, I'd like you to start us off. You are the world's leading scholar in LGBTQ+ media and parasocial relationships. We were so happy to have you involved in the Hope Lab project on parasocial relationships right from the beginning. Can you tell us all, what are parasocial relationships, and also kind of what are they not, just so that there are no kind of misconceptions about what we're kind of focusing on here?
Sure, that's a very generous introduction. Parasocial relationships are the idea that we have these social emotional connections to characters or celebrities with whom we've never met. The term has gotten a lot of popular press attention in the last 5 to 10 years, but it's been cited by social psychologists since the 1950s, who first started studying the idea by analyzing late night television show hosts and news anchors who were the first people to really break the fourth wall on television and speak directly to you. And so in social psychology, there was this belief that there was something about the gaze, and that seeing that person talk to you was different than seeing that person talk to somebody else on screen. Since then, there's been a large body of research that basically argues that we as humans know when we're watching television or a movie or YouTube, but that our brains have not quite evolved to determine personhood in terms of that's somebody on screen and that's somebody I'm meeting for the first time here in this room. And so we tend to establish connections, we tend to maintain those connections that we have with fictional characters and celebrities in very similar ways that we do with other people. So should you feel like your favorite fictional character is your friend, that is a perfectly normal and healthy response to seeing people on screen. My current favorite example is a woman I was chatting with not too long ago. I was interviewing her for a book project I'm working on this topic, and her example just really resonated. She said, she was a big fan of the television show 30 Rock, and she said that when Liz Lemon, the fictional protagonist, got engaged on the show, she was just distracted the next day at work because she kept thinking about what she would buy them as a wedding present. And that's just such a very clear exemplar of this idea that we engage in imagined interactions and that we have these social emotional bonds with people who we may not know or who may not even exist. So that's kind of the baseline lay definition of parasociality. I would say what it's not is psychoses. So oftentimes parasocial gets mixed up with what we might call celebrity worship or things that become unhealthy. And we tend to know that there are other DSM diagnosable illnesses that might correlate with celebrity worship on an unhealthy level. But the idea that you have a social bond with somebody on screen or through a podcast is a perfectly normal behavior.
So these are common and can be very powerful too, very important to people.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful, thank you. So Jeffrey, I'd like to turn to you. You
Yes.
are a best-selling author, a social media sensation. You're a contributor to CBS, BBC, Rolling Stone, Time Magazine. CBS called you the internet's most beloved anti-bully. How does it feel when you put out content, knowing that it's viewed by multiple tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who will be influenced and feel a connection to you without ever knowing you?
It feels great. What's the answer supposed to be? I have the great honor of putting out content in various forms. So when I am what I call in their pocket, that would be a TikTok, that is a very, to me, I want to choose my words carefully, that's a very intimate connection with someone. And if I'm able to affirm their personhood and affirm their self-esteem, no matter who they are, from within their own phone, a place that usually gives them stress and anxiety, right? if I'm able to do that, that to me feels like the most wonderful, beautiful gift in the world. But also, I was being a little cheeky earlier. In addition to being famous on TikTok, I was the first non-binary person to be interviewed on national television. It was a television, I'm famous, it was Newsmax in 2016, just before the election. The number of emails, the number of messages, I got negative ones, I see. People are reacting already. But this is a different story. I got positive ones. You're just like my cousin who didn't make it. You're like my friend that I had in college. I'm gonna reach out to them, right? So feeling that personal connection can be incredibly powerful for forwarding LGBTQ rights. And it's, to me, one of the best tools we have.
As part of our study, we had collected some data qualitatively from participants too, and many of them said things like, if it weren't for this influencer, I wouldn't be here anymore. And I think you shared in our pre-meeting that you have experienced getting those messages yourself.
Our pre-Zoom, yeah. That's, it's hard to say favorite, but those are the most impactful messages and DMs that I get. I wasn't going to be here, but I saw your video, and now I've decided to stay here.
Thank you. Isaiah, you are an award-winning humanitarian and advocate. Your work centers LGBTQ+, BIPOC folks, unhoused youth, and formerly incarcerated individuals. What do you feel like influencers, when they create this kind of content that positively impacts youth, and particularly LGBTQ+ and BIPOC youth, what do you feel they say or do that enhances that sense of parasocial relationship? So more than the message, but that sense of connection with another person who you've never met.
Wow, I know what you meant about generous title, hui. I would say, I think it's the authenticity. I think it's been called in several times here, is that there's a difference between scripted material and something that just feels real, and that comes through with these individuals. I think for me, one of my favorite individuals that I've kind of grown up, again, start from YouTube days, was Miss T.S. Madison, who is, for me, an icon in the way that she has been able to build herself up and stay true to who she is and really carry that authenticity in everything she does. But I think it's people like that where they're not afraid to be themselves, as messy as it is or as clean as it is. They're not afraid to say the things that they know will understand, that community will get. And so I think that's what makes it really powerful, is that they are us, and they're sharing these things, and they know that there'll be things that we'll hear, not like in a dog whistle kind of way, but in like a community calling kind of way. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. The young people prior, I think, really spoke to it, in that there's so many iterations and narratives that go on about young people that just feel very dramatized. But I think there's also some that they are that dramatic, and so it does help to see that. But then it's also nice when we get these moments where it's just normal people like talking. So I think that's what really does it.
So, it's not going through someone's PR team before it comes out to you. It's them talking authentically to their audience, including you.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah, sorry.
For everyone, one of the most striking findings in our study was we asked people to describe their favorite LGBTQ+ celebrity or content creator or influencer. And the people they listed were not, these folks with 500 million followers. The most commonly listed people had still, hundreds of thousands of followers, or perhaps even into the millions, but they weren't household names. What do you think it is about these, I'd say smaller scale in quotes, they're still very popular and large, but not household names. What do you think it is about these folks that enhances that sense of parasocial relationship and that sense of connection?
Lady Gaga's not sharing she had a salad for lunch. She's not doing the daily connection of what it's like, in my case, to be a happy, healthy, well-adjusted, loving your life LGBTQ.
So it's not even like you need these huge, huge things. It's what did you have for lunch? What are you doing right now that makes you feel that connection?
I think part of the power is the simplicity. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's the humanization of an individual. I think so much of media has made it so that these people we see on screen are then idolized and almost made into gods that feel untouchable. And then it's kind of enforced physically, like you don't really see them in everyday spaces. But then, like, I mean, there's times you go to Target and you might run into a TikToker there or somebody from Instagram, and it's like, oh, you're real, okay. And I think it's that, and I think it's the authenticity from community and representation, seeing ourselves. Because again, speaking from a BIPOC queer lens, all too often we're not given the limelight, we're not given that frontline role, we're not given the ability to be seen front and center. And so that's what these individuals on social media are able to do. They are the front role, they are the front person, they're the ones getting to tell the story, and it's coming from their mouth. And I think that's what makes it even more powerful, is that you know it's all, well, you hope that it's all real and that it's all coming from them, and that they're representing in an accurate way that gives you something to see outside of what you're dealing with. But yeah, I'm trying to think, like, I think the first, again, the name that comes to my mind is Ricky Thompson, because, again, an iteration of just like Black queer joy that is not all too often shown and seen, and to get to see that and just see it living so authentically, it really does motivate you to then to like, oh, I can do that too. Bretman Rock, all those kind of people, yeah.
One of the things that I will take away from today I think is really interesting is if you look at the data from CSS and the data from this Hope Lab report, we heard earlier that young people are seeking more escapism and fantasy in the films and in the television shows that they're watching, but when we ask young people what they're actually engaging in, they're using social media, and when you say why, they say because it's more authentic. And so it's making me wonder if there's actually different gratifications for the different ways in which young people are using media, and we know that YouTube is by far the most popular site that young people go to, actually regardless of gender or sexual orientation identity, to receive, to be exposed to content that feels authentic. And so I think that there is something about those micro-influencers that feels real. We've actually found that even those who are not maybe the most professional in editing, people feel a little bit closer to those folks because that's real, right? As Isaiah just said, you could run into that person in a grocery store because they just filmed a vlog where their cat walked in the back while they were talking the entire time. Like, that feels authentic, and it feels like somebody that you could meet, you could have a conversation with, which only likely intensifies that feeling of a socio-emotional connection.
So less polished and less produced, less curated perhaps, but more authentic and more true to themselves about their salad.
Yeah, one tiny thing that both of you said brilliantly is the largest media, you could count on one hand people like us in it. If someone's like us, how are they going to have that kind of connection without the representation? So they will literally only sometimes see that on TikTok or YouTube.
So our report from Hope Lab centered LGBTQ plus youth and BIPOC LGBTQ plus youth. Why do you think it's so important that those young people have access to this kind of representation and have a chance to form these kinds of parasocial relationships? Jumping off from that, what are the good sides and what can be some of the potential downsides that you might see to these parasocial relationships?
Well, I think everybody here has spoken to the fact that, we know representation matters, and what these social media platforms have provided are new avenues to simply find that representation. So when you don't see somebody like you on the television screen or at the movie theater, you can find that person through these social media platforms. And we know that sense of connection is so incredibly important for any sense of marginal identity development, to see someone that you can look up to or to see someone that you feel looks like you. And if you can't find that in kind of the mainstream mediaverse, you can find it on social media. So I think that these platforms are particularly important. What I would be really intrigued by, we don't have the research yet on this, but is we know that these relationships, these feelings of social emotional bonds are really important for LGBTQ non-binary young people. But is the transition from finding that connection online to finding those connections in person? And I think that that's really important, because what we do know is that if we only find those connections online, then we're lacking in understanding like coping strategies and our personal communication with regards to those kinds of things. And one of the things, Jeffrey, I would love for your take on this, that I found in my own research is that sometimes for the social media influencer, there's an incredible amount of social responsibility that they feel or pressure because they know this, right? As Jeffrey said, they get letters, they know that they are important to this population, and that can be overwhelming.
The thing I hate the most probably is that libs of TikTok can hurt LGBTQ teens through me. In February of 2023, the LAPD was at my house, knock knock, is there a bomb here? Searching the place because there was a viable bomb threat. And it happens often. And I had to choose, do I continue and be part of serving that every single day to LGBTQ youth? Do they see transcendence, or do they see somebody who's getting up every day to be a target? And it's something I still struggle with and don't have an answer for in the least.
I think one of the things that, one of the reasons why it's important, I feel, is because all too often, people see their future through media. We see what we're able to achieve through the stories that are told on screen. We see the potential that we might have through that. And I think, again, speaking to the community that I'm representing, we've been deprived of that for so long. We've had to make our own avenues to see ourselves in these spaces. And I think that's why these relationships are so impactful in that sense, because it gives people the ability to, like you said, have that representation, but not just have the representation, but see a future for themselves that they did not see anywhere else. I think to maybe get a little personal, today I got some news about a family member passing, and it's been a weird feeling because I didn't have the best relationship with this person towards the end, and it's got that weird kind of sense of how to navigate that. But I think what came up for me was this person turned out the way they did because they never had any representation to show them better, to show them different, to show them they could achieve something sooner in life, to be something better later on. The person I'm speaking of is my grandmother, and she was a Black woman who grew up in the South, was in Louisiana, and so there's a lot that comes with that identity in that space. And I think too, at one point she was a youth, and what could have helped change the trajectory of her life if it had been on the screen, if she had had a parasocial relationship that could have helped her to see that yes, she's a Black woman and that she's living in this space that doesn't appreciate her, but she's so much more and she can achieve so much more regardless of that. And so I think that for me, my goal in these spaces is to advocate for that authenticity and that connection so that we can tell people who have been told that they aren't worth anything or they don't have a future that they do, that there is potential there. Your garden hasn't been toiled enough yet to make that potential grow fruitfully.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and in the space. I do want to make sure we have some time for questions. I hope there are a couple.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I had a question about advocacy organizations who I often look at their social media accounts and I see that they don't have that many followers. And so I'm curious, do you look out at the legacy or traditional organizations who are moving our issues forward and being I wish one of us was inside of that organization to be able to speak more directly to folks so that they had a parasocial relationship. I see sort of an evolution of the ways that we understand a traditional communications director or a social media director that's not so institutionalized. Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Are you asking the influencer? Or the research?
I think all perspectives. It'd be great to hear. I feel so much we're throwing billions of dollars at advertising, and yet I feel we're missing the mark in terms of building some of those authentic relationships with people. To be here's a day in the life of working at Planned Parenthood, or here's a day in the life working at a homelessness services. I'm curious to get your perspective too.
I think that Well, yes, it is that we're not in those spaces. It's that we know we've traditionally been harmed by those spaces, and that when we've attempted to get in those spaces, it's been shut down heavily. I think just to share, at the last convening we had here, there was some individuals who they were those people to be representatives in those spaces, and they felt like they had no power. Like they were we were saying everything, they were agreeing right along with us, and they said, this is all great, and when I go back, none of this is gonna fly. And I think that speaks even more volumes, because what it shows is that like that representation isn't enough. It's that power. It's that the ability to share that power with others and to recognize that our systems and our structures are not built to do that. A lot of them are meant to keep that hierarchy and keep that power centralized at one individual or a group of individuals, and then keep the regime as it is. I think we have to really be honest and call in the aspects that maybe we're afraid to. I think what I really liked earlier was that Joy was kind of calling that in a subtle way, that like people aren't gonna like the change. It's uncomfortable, but like think of all the uncomfort that all those voices who are consistently being silenced by that lack of movement are going through. There's entire communities who have been uncomfortable for over 450 plus years in this country. And so when do they get to be comfortable? But yeah.
I'll just add, this is such a dated reference, but I always use it in class. There's a research study I like that shows that you're 10 times more likely to open an email from a company if it was forwarded to you from a friend than if it was from the company itself. Obviously, we trust our friends. So if we see certain characters and celebrities as our friends, then it makes it more likely that we would trust those individuals in terms of representing a large organization. I will say the term parasocial has been used in the marketing literature in the last 3 to 5 years a lot. And so folks who study the psychology of consumer behavior are picking this up for sure. So I think that that could be harnessed for good in the kind of environments that you're talking about.
I'll say if you put Meg Thee Stallion on and she agreed to it, I'm right there with you. I'm an Aquarius, so I gotta stick with my girlies, but yes.
Hi. I was wondering, there's a huge loneliness epidemic that the Surgeon General has spoken about and so on. And I'm just curious how you feel about what it means to have a friend that you don't know, that you will never see, and that psychologically you're connecting to, but can never really have the real thing. I just wonder about the danger of that. I understand very much how valuable it can be also, but can you speak to it a little bit? What do you think it means for a person to identify to that degree?
It's an excellent question, and I will note that when the idea of parasociality started to be studied, there was a hypothesis that those who experienced the most loneliness would have the strongest parasocial connections, kind of as you're saying in terms of like compensating for a lack of real-life connection. A vast majority of the literature suggests that it's actually the opposite, that people who make friends really easily and have really strong social networks also have the strongest parasocial relationships, which if you think about it also makes sense because you have the psychological toolkit needed to feel a strong bond to someone else. So it doesn't matter if that's on screen or in person. My research with queer youth, and in fact I'm doing some work with people who are immobile and homebound, and for these particular populations, there are arguably stronger benefits to the parasocial relationship because it's providing that sense of connection that they would otherwise lack. So, when we think about the loneliness epidemic, I think that that's certainly a little bit more complicated, right? But it actually tends to be people who are socially extroverted that develop the strongest bonds with characters and celebrities. It's most helpful in terms of compensation for people who are lacking that connection somewhere else. And so, for a lot of queer youth who feel like there's no one else like them, like I said, we're finding really strong parasocial bonds among people who are homebound because they're seeking those kind of connections they wouldn't have anywhere else. I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but it's something I think is fascinating.
And I think there was one thing I also wanted to call in that was brought in earlier around that topic. I think something that gets forgotten is that there are like byproducts of these relationships as well. I know I grew up during the age of like YouTube booming. I had a little bit of a YouTube channel. I did do the cinnamon challenge and I regret it every day of my life. And it is on YouTube, but I won't tell you where. But I think what I loved about that era is the community that was birthed from that. Like you could be a big fan of someone, but like the communities that would grow around that, like the discords, back then the group me chats, I can't remember, there was like 2 other apps we used to be on, Tumblr and all that stuff. Those are the secondary communities that you got from this one individual that then you were able to really build some of that other rapport. And there are times when that transcends into like physical spaces as well. I know that there was a Twitch streamer that me and a group of friends were really, like, we watched faithfully and all of that. And then it came time that we were like, hey, we should all meet in person, and we did. And it was a really great experience, and then everybody kind of built their bonds even stronger through that. But I think that there is, while there can be negative things, I think that we're in an age where it's doing a lot more benefit. I feel like people's empathy grows even stronger through these relationships, especially when you're able to find community that uplifts and validates those empathetic feelings you're feeling.
Whoa, I gotta say something. I'm doing it for real, so I can't speak for other people. Most commonly, people say that they feel seen by my content, and I'm gonna say something very weird. I really do see them. What I am doing is creating a safe space for the world. I'll be very specific. What I'm doing is showing people what needs to be healed. Some people are very open to that, some people not so much open to that. And I really honestly do that with my content. Parasocial is often called unreal, but to me it is real.
I think an ideal kind of situation would be that these parasocial relationships enable people to explore their identities and be able to find outlets for creativity and inspiration that they may not have access to or even be safe accessing in their real life, and then be able to expand their identities and their selves from that like a springboard. So we're kind of not talking about someone hiding under the bed sheets for 12 hours a day looking at their phone, but rather feeling this sense of deep inspiration and connection that can actually help them in other aspects of their life rather than kind of pull them more into a shell.
And I don't know if you want to say something about it, but LGBTQ youth, sometimes the parasocial person accepting them is the only person they have accepting them.
I have a question. The kids and family entertainment business right now is in a bit of a crisis mode, and in part because I think there's a struggle to figure out how to have kids entertainment live next to like what's being provided on YouTube, but also sort of set itself apart. And so I'm interested to hear if you guys think of yourselves as entertainment, or do you think of yourselves as something else, and where does that line end?
You kind of described grown-ups entertainment too, right? They're in a crisis as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the influence.
I'm the entertainer?
That was the question.
Okay. The right wing dings me a lot for influencing children. My channel is not for children. It's not intended to be. If you look at the demographics of who follows me, middle-aged ladies, hi. They drive the whole internet, honestly.
She does.
Your mom follows me?
I found out she does. Yep. But she's 25. She's 25.
Yes, of course, so am I. They want to go there constantly. But I do preach to inner children and try to help them feel healed, even if they're, in a 50-year-old's experience. The reason I bring that up is every darn thing is in flux. And I don't know if your question was looking for some wisdom about where the industry ought to go. Who knows, right? Who knows?
And thank you. And with that, we will wrap up this session. Thank you all.